Last month in Cape Town, the new government's Truth and Reconciliation Commission began hearings to uncover details of the old regime's covert biological warfare program. What actually emerged was a startling picture of how easily a state-sponsored program can be developed and what happens when it runs out of control.
Of a fair trial. The purpose of our hearings.
The man behind the program, Dr. Wouter Basson, a former Special Forces Army brigadier and a personal heart specialist to ex-President Botha. For 7 days, we listened to testimony from men who worked for Basson. All the witnesses who had been involved and agreed to testify have applied for amnesty and qualify for immunity from prosecution.
What are your full names? The whole truth and nothing but the truth, say so help you God.
Basson declined to give evidence. He currently faces 10 criminal charges, including conspiracy to murder. He ran the government's official biological warfare program, but colleagues revealed that secretly he also ran an unofficial one.
He approached me if I would be willing to assist them in biological agents for warfare. Basically, the program was in 2 categories. The one is more sophisticated mass destruction weapons, and the other one was what we've called a dirty tricks sort of program, where products could have been supplied for individual assassinations.
Kruger Park, the lush wild game reserve on the borders of South Africa, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, was to become a natural source for many of the bacterium poisons used in South Africa's dirty war. Basson commanded the medical battalion which supported the special forces of the South African Army who used the new bacterial agents. This became the first modern biological conflict.
Africa is the ideal place for biological weapons to be used because of the natural occurrence of endemic diseases, which are almost all of them are the types of diseases that have been found to be used as biological weapons. We were looking at those agents which were the most probable ones that could have been used and delivered within the African environment. Those that were produced and stocked were E. coli, Yersinia pestis again, Staphylococcus, anthracis, the anthrax, Clostridia, Salmonella, Flavobacterium, Pseudomonas, Proteus, Vibrio cholera, and Streptococcus.
We had about 45 different strains of anthrax in our collection. And because the Kruger National Park is a basic endemic area for anthrax, we worked closely with them and to look at some of the problems that's associated with anthrax in wild animals. And the purpose of this project was to establish whether one could produce a strain of anthrax that would be resistant to penicillin.
But the biological weapons weren't just aimed at an external enemy. There were also projects which were specifically targeted at South Africa's own indigenous black population in townships like Soweto.
One small remark by Dr. Basson was that at the time there was a lot of political problems in the Eastern Cape. And he remarked that possibly they should sort out that crowd with cholera or something.
It was a wickedly simple idea. Cholera is endemic in southern Africa. Nobody would know that it had been used to contaminate the primitive water supply of the black population.
I was frankly shocked to see this. With that, you can cause massive outbreaks of cholera amongst various populations.
And now the Truth Commission's lawyer probed further.
Can you give us an indication of whether this could cause a serious epidemic?
Well, I assume that it could cause an epidemic, yes.
I use the word serious epidemic.
Yes. When I got the request to produce these organisms, it was to be used in the war situation in Angola.
You felt it was acceptable to use cholera as a weapon in Angola?
Well, with the information that was available to me, that these guys were using it on us, so why don't we use it on them?
The official biological warfare program was the responsibility of the then South African Surgeon General Niels Knobel. It was he who gave Bas on his head, who authorized the deceptions that brought biological warfare knowledge from across the world.
It was an uphill battle to obtain that information. Remember, South Africa at that time was fairly well isolated by both the East and the Western countries in the world. We had to therefore clandestinely and covertly penetrate their own programs and through direct contact with scientists and so on, obtain the information.
You had to penetrate the programs of the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom and the United States?
Well, many more than that. But certainly those three that you mentioned would certainly be the leading nations in these fields.
Britain's Porton Down was then a world leader in defensive biological warfare projects and a magnet for those who needed information. They deny any knowledge of South African penetration of their security. Do you think that you got some friendly, tacit, under-the-counter help from the United Kingdom and the United States?
Yes, we did.
No doubt about that.
No doubt.
And we're talking now not just conversations in bars, but manuals, information.
Tom, I'm not entirely sure if whatever we did obtain was given willingly or whether it was obtained illegally. So you understand when I answer the question that way, I certainly wouldn't like to make an accusation that members of the staff of the institutions in the UK and the Americans provided that information to us, freely. I don't think that is necessarily true.
But information and manuals landed on your desk.
That's correct.
Which were top secret.
That's correct.
So they were either stolen or given.
Yes, exactly.
But General Knobel also authorized an ethically dubious program, a mixture of the biological and the chemical. This is Daisy, a chimpanzee originally from Britain, used in an experiment in fertility control, in other words, an attempt to create an infertility program, one that went well beyond military needs.
The targets were supposed to be the black population because the most serious problem was held to us the birth rate of the black population, and that it would outgrow the resources of the country. And it was very, very important that this be brought under control. There was no doubt about that. This was given to us by Besson, by the Surgeon General, and by all the people we know about. So it was very clear, and this was the most important project we had to work on.
And what was it?
What we developed.
Yes.
We tackled the problem from various sides, either developing a vaccine for males, and on the other hand for females. And this contraceptive research is worldwide research. So it was an easy area to tap into and get basic information.
But the vaccine would have been given to these people surreptitiously or
Yes,
under pretext.
We had to work on a product that could have been given without the knowledge of the person receiving it, either orally or in some sort of injection.
You would have made people sterile without their knowledge.
That's correct.
Did you have a view about that?
As I've said, our view were the one being indoctrinated with that this was the biggest problem for the white South Africans in South Africa.
Was that your personal view too?
That was my personal view at the time, yes.
Inevitably, the government's secret biological warfare program directed against the townships began to take on a racist dimension. For true believers in white supremacy, science seemed to offer a hand, although this plan was never followed up.
Dr. Besson presented me with a document. This document contained a proposition, and this guy says he's got a product, a bacteria, which has got the possibility of only affecting making sick and killing pigmented people. Dr. Basson asked me to study the literature and the possibility scientifically. Is that a possibility or not? And we concluded that it is a definite possibility. And it was decided that it would be good if the government had this weapon. And I asked him, why, voter, are you doing this? And he said, I've got one daughter. And one day, when the black people take over the country, and my daughter asked me, Daddy, what did you do to prevent this? My conscience would be clean. And I must admit, that was the psychosis which prevailed.
Soon, Dr. Basson's unofficial program moved in the direction of murder. It is alleged there was a list of enemies of the state who were to be assassinated.
Did you realize that you were involved in helping Dr. Basson in a biological warfare program that would be used to kill people?
Yes, when the program and the negotiations between him and myself progressed, it was spelled out that it will be a biological and chemical weapons program. It will be offensive. We spent initially a lot of time on the ethical use of these things, and I was convinced that the products will be used in a war sense very ethically, and that there isn't much of a difference if you use a gun to kill someone or if you use a more refined product to do that.
And there was more. Research now began to focus on untraceable toxins that mimic death by natural causes.
Did you work on a project that would possibly induce heart attacks in people?
Yeah, that was some of the toxins extracted from plants could have caused heart attacks in people.
Were they tested on the baboons?
They were tested on the baboons, yeah.
Did the baboons have heart attacks?
Some of them had slight effects.
The Commission learned of an extraordinary document found in Basson's possession, which contained details of a bizarre list of carefully disguised biological, toxic and chemical assassination weapons which may have been issued to individual killers.
For toxins, chocolate was the favorite.
We mixed botulinum type A toxin, which I produced in a 5 milliliter glass freeze-dried vial. With milk, with water, with whiskey, with beer, all types of liquid that could possibly aid the ingestion of the toxin.
We've got some sugar in salmonella. We've got some whiskey and paraquat. We've got 5 coffee chocolates with bee anthrax. There's another 5 coffee chocolates with botulinum. Would you consider this list to be a list which could have been used for some form of scientific research, or a list which is a list of murder weapons?
Undoubtedly a list of murder weapons. No value for research whatsoever.
The riots in Soweto fueled the perceived need for a program of political assassination. The Reverend Frank Shikane, today Director General of the Office of the Deputy President, was an ANC hero and a target in the late 80s. He fell terribly ill during a visit to Namibia.
I felt like I was, about to vomit, to throw out, and I was sweating and losing lots of energy. It was quite clear something was going wrong. And by the time I reached the hospital, I couldn't move myself. They had to carry me on stretchers to get to the hospital. At that stage, we didn't know what was happening at all. And it was in a remote hospital midway to the north in Namibia, in a hospital where there were only 2 doctors for the whole hospital. And the hospital stopped for 5 hours to try to save my life.
The poison used was a deadly toxin organophosphate, which once it enters the body through the skin, kills slowly and painfully. When Frank Shikane went to the United States on a speaking tour in 1989, the assassin struck for a second time.
At one stage, I thought it was the end of it. You know, the first attack was quite a strange feeling. But when I was in the United States and I had attacks every 30 hours, then it became clear that I wasn't going to survive.
It was clear from his records that he was poisoned by the stuff we were producing.
Do you know where the stuff was introduced? How did it get to his skin?
Yeah, it was introduced to his underwear, and when he put on some underpants, he became ill, and the Americans couldn't really pinpoint what was happening to him.
It sounds almost comic, poisoned underpants, but it nearly killed him, didn't it?
It nearly killed him. Yeah. He was a very fortunate man not to be killed.
The attempt on Frank Shikani's life. They made a lot of mistakes there. They did simple, silly things like, instead of spreading the toxin which should be absorbed through the skin over a fairly large area to promote absorption, the operative put it on a tiny little spot. Then he laced 5 pairs of underpants instead of only 1, so Frank Shikani got sick repeatedly, immediately showed it was poisoning. The intelligence said he was going to Namibia and he went to America. They were counting on very little forensic capability in Namibia.
And ultimately, Nelson Mandela, allegedly the biggest target of all for Walter Basson.
There were also plans to contaminate medication used by President Nelson Mandela at Pollesmoor with the untraceable heavy metal poison thallium. Shortly after Nelson Mandela's release, he was very confident that Nelson Mandela's brain function would be impaired progressively for some time.
Thallium was never used against Mandela, but it may have been used against Steve Biko, the hero of the Black Consciousness movement, whose strange behavior in a police station was noticed shortly before he was beaten to death.
Dr. Basson mentioned, after he had told us a lot about the effects of thallium, if you give just the right dose, you mustn't give too much, but just the right amount, then you can cause what appears to be an outbreak of meningitis or encephalitis. You get similar symptoms. And in so doing, he mentioned in passing that he had given some thallium. We said we had given some thallium to Steve Biko.
And biological assassination was taken well beyond South Africa's borders, on one occasion to Zambia.
Anthrax spores were put into the food of 3 Russian advisors in Lusaka, advisors to the ANC, that is, and one of them died.
Some people were assassinated.
Yeah, but the assassinations were with the crude off-the-shelf products. And that is my point. And this was sort of the thing which worried me, that you know, they were not interested in proper, sophisticated products.
The killers moved in army jeeps, driving to the borders, releasing anthrax spores and hepatitis into the bush near hostile villages and enemy encampments, contaminating water with cholera. For urban work, some of the inventions would not have disgraced the pages of an Ian Fleming novel.
Are you aware of these cigarettes prepared with anthrax?
Yes, I was asked to do that.
So you personally put drops of anthrax onto these cigarettes?
I was given a packet of Camel cigarettes and I was requested to drop some of the drops onto the filter of the organism, of the cigarettes.
And what would have happened to the person who smoked these cigarettes?
Well, it's difficult to speculate, but I can imagine that it might have fatal results.
Were you aware of that at the time you did it?
By 1994, the dirty war was over and a major new global problem emerged. South Africa's sophisticated biological warfare program was in danger of proliferating to the new rogue states. Basson was already well known to the West, and their anxieties were confirmed when he took an unexplained trip to Libya. Basson's visits to Libya were spotted by a British intelligence officer who immediately warned London and Washington of the potentially explosive connection between the rogue South African biological warfare expert and Colonel Gaddafi's regime. So the South African government soon found itself facing a series of formal complaints from Britain and the United States, who wanted Basson reined in and the entire biological warfare program destroyed.
What was your reaction when you learned that Dr. Basson had gone to Libya?
Well, we were very concerned. Here was the ANC had very close contacts with Gaddafi. The ANC's military forces trained in Libya and with the Libyan forces. And then when Basson went there, the man who pretty much single-handedly put together the South African BW program, Gaddafi had been trying to get a BW program for years and years. And so we put two to two together and said, we've got an emergency situation here.
So a special meeting was set up through the Secret Services and the National Intelligence, and we had a meeting. I am as concerned as they are that we should prevent the knowledge which has been achieved in South Africa to spread, to be used elsewhere. But the real worry also from the American and the British government, when they approached me shortly before the 1994 election, was the knowledge in the minds of people, the knowledge in the heads of certain specific individuals and whatever notes they might have made which were not put under control. And there a specific name came to the fore, a certain voter Basson.
Basson had been ordered to destroy all the biological warfare paperwork after first transferring it to a set of CD-ROMs. He then went into a different business. Dr. Basson's spectacular career as the mastermind behind South Africa's biological warfare program ended in high drama and low farce in this park in Pretoria. The man who had once scoured the world in a private jet, deceiving the top-secret biological institutions of Britain and America, had become a street dealer in ecstasy who walked straight into a police trap. We've recreated those moments. South African detectives had a police informer who told them Basson was dealing in ecstasy. The informer was ordered to ask Basson for a huge quantity, get him to drive to this park in Pretoria, and then entrap him and hand him over to waiting detectives.
Some of us was hiding between the trees and plants. We decided to put the person in the boot of the car. At the moment he saw us, he started running.
Basson drove straight into the trap, but was fast enough to escape from his car before they arrested him. He was chased by armed narcotics squad detectives through the park. They were aware of his identity and knew they had a very high-ranking army officer in their sights. Basson, who thought he was about to be murdered by foreign intelligence agents, was desperate not to be caught.
I ran to the suspect, Wouter Basson, and when he saw us, I think he got afraid and he ran into the river.
In a final effort to escape, Basson plunged into the water. But he had chosen a shallow stream, and there was no way out save for a wet and humiliating surrender.